नमस्कार। भारतीय इतिहास कांग्रेस का प्लैटिनम जुबली अधिवेशन दिल्ली के जवाहरलाल नेहरू विश्वविद्यालय में आज से शुरू हो रहा है। उपराष्ट्रपति मोहम्मद हामिद अंसारी 3 दिनों तक चलने वाले सम्मेलन का उद्घाटन अब से कुछ देर में करने वाले हैं। इसमें 1500 से ज्यादा शोध पत्र पेश किए जाएंगे। सम्मेलन में देश और दुनिया के 500 से ज्यादा जाने माने इतिहासकार हिस्सा ले रहे हैं और इस कार्यक्रम के मीडिया पार्टनर राज्यसभा टेलीविजन ने इसकी कवरेज के लिए खास इंतजाम किए हैं। सीधा आपको लिए चल रहे हैं इस अधिवेशन में।
Hello. Honorable Vice President of India, Shri Hamid Ansari, Vice Chancellor Professor Sopori, Rector Professor Sudha Pai, President of the Indian History Congress Professor Indu Banga, President-elect of Indian History Congress Professor B.D. Chattopadhyay, Executive Committee members of the Indian History Congress, delegates, media persons, students and my dear friends. Jawaharlal Nehru University is the product of the strong nationalistic sensibilities that had provided the foundational principles of institution making in post-independent India. Excellence and relevance have been the two founding principles which guided Mr. M.C. Chagla, the Education Minister, who had earlier been India's representative in the United Nations, when he piloted the Jawaharlal Nehru Bill in the Parliament in 1964. Introduced first in the Rajya Sabha on 1st December 1964, the bill was finally passed on 16th November 1966 and the university was born. From 1969, when the university began its operation, to 2014, when we are celebrating its 45th years of existence, the university has charted a course which does not have a parallel in the annals of nation's history. The university's name has become associated with good scholarship, compassionate students, teachers and staff, and a vibrant ideological politics. The teaching and research in JNU have shown a direction and a level of commitment to the higher educational ideals of the nation. The university has also remained steadfast in its commitment to the foundational ideals of the nation: democracy, secularism, justice and equality. It is in this overarching universe the teachers and the students of JNU have gradually shaped an academic universe based on the principles of intellectual independence and an idea of relatedness relating to the institution, to the soil and its people, and solving issues through the methods evolved from independent ways of inquiry. The autonomous and independent line of inquiry that the historians in the Center for Historical Studies, JNU, carried forward in the first decade of the university also shaped the intellectual universe of the university and in many ways gave direction to the discourse outside the university. The works of its faculty S. Gopal, Professor S. Gopal, Professor Bipin Chandra, Professor Romila Thapar, Professor Satish Chandra, Professor Sabyasachi Bhattacharya, Professor Suvira Jaiswal, Professor K.N. Panikkar, Professor R. Champak Lakshmi, Professor Harvans Mukhya and all others have inspired subsequent generation. These scholars also emphasized the autonomy of the third world intellectuals and resisted any pressure on Indian academia in general and history in particular to be reduced to mere mimics of the metropolitan discourse. We, the inheritor of that proud tradition, wish to celebrate the idea of self-respect and confidence of our heritage by hosting the Platinum Jubilee session of the Indian History Congress. The Indian History Congress came into existence in 1935 due to the efforts of enlightened scholars who wished to establish an academic body free from political pressure and ideological bias. It has grown in numbers and in terms of its reach and today stands out as the widest platform for scholars and researchers from across the country. By celebrating the 75th annual session of the Indian History Congress, we express our solidarity to the professional historians who have given a sense of pride and direction to the profession as well as to the society. This is also the 25th year of Academic Staff College JNU, which helped hundreds of teachers and university teachers from across the country to be associated through AC with JNU and its intellectual milieu. The AC has been the meeting ground for these teachers from different parts of the country at one place. And apart from being the intellectual meeting ground, has also been the melting pot of different cultural and intellectual traditions. AAC's decisions to organize the Platinum Jubilee session of the Indian History Congress is a tribute to the teaching community in the country. With these words, let me invite our Vice Chancellor, Professor Sopori, to welcome you all.
Honorable Shri Hamid Ansari ji, Vice President of India, Professor Indu Banga, President of Indian History Congress, and Professor B.D. Chattopadhyay, President-elect of IHC, Professor Irfan Habib, Professor Tipta, Professor Zafri, Professor Sudhapai, the Rector of this university, Executive Council members of IHC, Dr. Rakesh Bhattavyal, Organizing Secretary, esteemed participants, members of the press, guests, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Jawaharlal Nehru University, I extend you a warm welcome to this Congress. We are in fact thankful to the President of IHC for accepting our offer to host the 75th session of IHC at Jawaharlal Nehru University. And we are grateful to Shri Hamid Ansari ji for kindly accepting our invitation to inaugurate this session. JNU, as was just mentioned, is in existence for over 45 years. And I must tell you that at present, as per the National Accreditation Council, we are being ranked one of the top university in the country. At present, we have 10 schools of studies. 4 of these are in social sciences and humanities, and 6 schools of studies in natural sciences, and there are 4 special centers. This university has over 550 faculty members, more than 8,000 students, and all these students from various different strata of the society. The Center for Historical Studies is one of the oldest and also our prestigious centers, located in the School of Social Sciences. The eminent faculty of the center is known nationally, internationally, and they have brought visibility and recognition to this university and to the country. Most of you who are attending this meeting, I'm sure you know the contributions of this faculty. In fact, I must mention at this stage that it was a great loss for us in passing away of Professor Bipin Chandra, who was Professor Emeritus and one of the founder of CHS. Though this center has been in existence right from the inception of the university, yet as I learned that this is for the first time that Jawaharlal Nehru University is hosting this Congress. Hence, it's a very special moment for us. Despite the weather, it is now improving. In the morning, we were a little worried how we are going to go through, but we have now sunshine here. And I'm sure that you will have wonderful lectures, interacting sessions during the next 3 days. Once again, I welcome all of you and wish you all the best.
Let me invite Professor Jafri, Secretary Indian History Congress, to take over the proceedings from us.
His Excellency Shri Hamid Ansari Sahab, the Vice President of India, Professor Indu Banga, the President of the 74th session, and Professor B.D. Chattopadhyay, the President-elect for the 75th session of Indian History Congress, fellow delegates, EC members, and friends. This is my pleasure and privilege to host this institute, to organize this session of the 75th session of Indian History Congress at this historic university under the aegis of the Academic Staff College. this is my privilege to request, because this is our system, that we request the senior most Vice President, Professor Irfan Habib, to propose the name of the President-elect, Professor B.D. Chattopadhyay, to be the President of the 75th session of Indian History Congress.
Madam President, members of the Indian History Congress, guests, and ladies and gentlemen, it is a privilege for me to propose the name of such an eminent scholar as Professor B.D. Chattopadhyay for the office of President of the Indian History Congress for the next session, for this session. Professor Chattopadhyay's contributions have been very considerable in rebuilding the history of our past. Like any scholar, he has engaged in important controversies with others, and whatever be our opinions about these controversies, they have added much to our information and understanding. He has also edited Professor D.D. Kausambi's works, which is itself a very important contribution to historical research. I am also, although this is not usual, but I would also like to say that his presidential address today is specially topical. The aspects of unity and diversity in Sanskrit thought. For all these reasons, it is, as I have already said, it is a particularly important privilege for me to propose his name as directed by the Executive Committee for acceptance as the President of the 75th session of the Indian History Congress. Thank you.
This proposal to install Professor B.D. Chattopadhyay as the General President of 75th session of Indian History Congress has to be seconded. So I request Professor Romla Thapar, the Professor Emeritus, to second the proposal for the installation of Professor B.D. Chattopadhyay as the General President of the 75th session of Indian History Congress.
I have great pleasure in seconding the proposal that has been made by Professor Habib to install Professor Chattopadhyay as the President of the Indian History Congress. My pleasure is doubled by the fact that he has been a colleague of many years, a colleague whom I have greatly respected, and he has been one of the most significant historians of ancient India. So I have great pleasure in seconding this proposal.
Now there is a happy custom in the History Congress tradition to exchange the seats, and now I request Professor B.D. Chattopadhyay to take over the seat from Professor Indu Banga, and Professor Indu Banga to take over the seat from Professor Badu Acharya. This is the change of the guard, so I request this tradition, this happy tradition to be followed. the Indian History Congress has it's generally, there are presentation of the research papers and by the young scholars as the senior historians, and this year we have received around more than 1,000 papers, research papers. So these papers are rigorously vetted and edited, and after the process, a rigorous process, they are selected for the publication in our proceedings. And I have mentioned that our proceedings have been recognized by the UGC at the level of the refereed journal. So this year's proceeding, the 74th session was conducted as the Bhubaneswar Raman Shah University, and these proceedings are ready for the release. So I request the Honorable Vice President of India for the release of this proceeding.
I'm very sure of that.
This is for the purpose of photograph.
You mean we'll have to return it? Well, I'll be happy to take it back. My copy.
Now I request the Honorable Vice President Shri Hamid Ansari for the inaugural address for the Indian History Congress. Sir.
Thank you. Vice Chancellor Professor Sapure, Professor Sudha Pai, Professor Indu Banga, Professor Chattopadhyay, Professor Irfan Habib Saab, Professor Tripta, Professor Mukherjee, Dr. Rakesh Bhattabyal, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is unusual, if not sacrilegious, to invite a person who does not have history bred in his bones to a conclave of men and women steeped in the intricacies of a much talked about but inadequately understood human pursuit that dwells on the past and seeks to enlighten or confound the present. I therefore deem it a great privilege to be invited by the Indian History Congress to inaugurate its 75th session. I felicitate the Congress on reaching this landmark. My own academic discipline in the distant past was political science, and I do recall Professor John Seeley's jingle, well known in my time and presumably not forgotten today, that history without political science has no fruit, and political science without history has no roots. In more recent times, and for professional reasons, I came to value Winston Churchill's aphorism, study history, in history lies all the secrets of statecraft. Historians at all times have endeavored, as Herodotus put it, to preserve from decay the remembrance of what men have done. Historians have dwelt on the facts of the past and sought to make implicit or explicit judgments about those facts. Not to be ignored is a mid-19th century caution that historians have been seduced from truth not by their imagination but by their reason, pursuant to the impulse of distorting facts to suit general principles. Equally hazardous is the propensity to read the past into the present or the present into the past. So is the temptation to ignore the distinction between memory and history. Memory is based on identification with the past and is unavoidably egocentric, while history is based on its treatment as an external object and not a part of the self. History also cannot be faith-based. The domains of the two exist separately, and conflation does not further the cause of either. To a layperson, a number of questions are unavoidable. What then is history? And with what does it deal? What is the task of the historian? Is history a science or an art or a bit of both? Does it really deal with the past or does so in the context of contemporary knowledge and imagination? A simple answer is that it is a method of inquiry which deals with what has reportedly happened and not exactly as it happened. It is a narrative of change. It has been suggested that historical objectivity is seen to be not a single idea, but rather a sprawling sets of assumptions, attitudes, aspirations, and antipathies. It is evident that on most, if not all occasions, the narrative is contested. Such contestation, nevertheless, needs to have a basis in fact, demonstrable and logically sustainable. As E.H. Carr put it, the historian without facts is rootless and futile. Facts without the historian are dead and meaningless. He adds that the study of history is inescapably the study of causes. This would exclude what has been called counterfactuals or the what-if category and its simplistic assumptions and premises. It is thus evident that methodology is critical to the study of history. Efforts to curb what has been called intellectual efflorescence through official dicta can only be viewed as undesirable. Furthermore, contestations over the historical past need civility of the discourse to ensure that it does not cross the imperatives of social peace and societal cohesion. Carr also dwelt on history's wider relevance. As he put it, an individual stripped of memory finds the world a confusing place. A society with no sense of history is unaware of where it has come from or where it is going. Is there a more practical relevance to history? To my mind, it helps us know and hopefully learn from the mistakes of the past. Those mistakes relate to frailties in judgment leading to mistakes in statecraft and governance. These, as one historian has put it, could be due to tyranny or oppression, excessive ambition, incompetence or decadence, and folly or perversity. In each, the inability or the unwillingness of society or its ruling establishment to pay heed to reason and realism, to dissenting opinion, and to alternative courses of policy or action led to unfounded certitudes resulting in mistakes. It is for this reason that in every period of the past, beginning perhaps with the 30th century BC Egyptian king Menes, codes for dispensing justice were enunciated. Alongside, manuals were penned for the guidance of rulers. Departures from these and the resulting consequences is what historians have dwelt upon. History writing and history teaching has a contemporary relevance in a more evident sense. We live in a world of nation states, but the idea of a homogeneous nation state is clearly problematic. Diversity is identifiable even in the most homogeneous of societies today. The global scene in modern times has been replete with complexities and tensions of what has been called the national question. Domestic hostilities and licentiousness of private wars in violation of laws, to recapitulate a phrase used by Edward Gibbon in the concluding section of his monumental Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, are the most potent and forcible causes of destruction. Instances can be found in the 20th century history. In our own country, the sheer diversity of identities, 4,635 communities according to the Anthropological Survey of India, is a terse reminder that the care that needs to be taken while putting together the profile of a national identity. It has, of necessity, to be liberal and accommodative, marked, to quote an eminent scholar, neither by complete homogenization nor by particularism of closed communities. Instead, it is a balance struck by the mutual gravitational pull of disparate sections that make the whole. Our sagacity in building a pluralist structure that have stood the test of over 6 decades stands in contrast to many straitjacket edifices in other societies that came to grief. By the same token, these structures need constant nurturing. It is no longer a matter of debate that history has to be more than narrowly political or economic. The imperative is to make it comprehensive and inclusive of neglected groups in society. These subaltern classes, as Gramsci had pointed out, are not unified, and their history therefore has to be intertwined with that of civil society. It has challenged what has been called the univocability of statist discourse. It has sought to focus on Dalits and gender issues. The methodology of studying these opened up new and enriching vistas of study for historians. The pasture of stupidity, said the great medieval historian Ibn Khaldun, is unwholesome for mankind. He warned historians not to succumb to the temptation of sensationalism, adding that a hidden pitfall of historiography is disregard for the fact that conditions within nations and regions change with the change of period and the passage of time. Friends, this Congress of Historians has the traditional 6 sections. Allow me to draw attention to section 4, focused on countries other than India. I wonder if this could read countries and regions other than India. My purpose in suggesting this is to explore the fascinating maritime history that unavoidably emanates from the 7,517 kilometers of coastline and the exclusive economic zone that we have on the Arabian Sea and the Bay of Bengal, and in relation to the Indian Ocean as a whole. People living in coastal regions have traditionally depended on the sea for their livelihood. They are one with the sea, and the sea is an integral ingredient of their worldview. The maritime people of India are no exception to this, and trading activities of Indians in coastal areas in ancient and medieval periods testify to this. Our culture, wrote a Kutchi scholar some years back, is wet with the sea. Prior to the arrival of the Portuguese in the 16th century in the seas around India, trade in the Indian Ocean was characterized by a group of ports, sometimes in virtual independence of land powers in the hinterland, Surat and Calicut on the west coast, and Masulipatam and a number of ports on the Coromandel coast in the east stand out in historical and commercial records. The Portuguese, followed by the Dutch and the British, intruded on this autonomous regional activity and began to change its character and its multiple human faces. In subsequent centuries, European colonial empires effectively put an end to it. Apart from the earlier work of Radha Kumud Mukherjee, the studies conducted by S. Arasaratnam and Ashin Das Gupta in the second half of the last century, and some excellent monographs by Europeans and Australian scholars, sufficient research work on these aspects of our history has yet to be done. A corrective is necessary, more so in the context of the changed regional requirements in the 21st century that necessitate trading and economic cooperation that will come in the wake of the announced Look East and Act East policy of the government. There is also the expectation that a similar approach would be formulated in the foreseeable future for the regions to the west, covering the Arabian Sea, the Persian Gulf, the Red Sea, and the East African region. Another region deserving attention is beyond the subcontinent in north and northwest. The situation of historical scholarship relating to Afghanistan and Central Asian republics is no better. The extant works worthy of mention relate to the period before 1947. Each of these societies is relevant to us in economic, strategic, and social terms. Each necessitates much greater scholarly attention. One last thought before I conclude. History cannot be studied in isolation. I draw attention of this learned gathering to what a contemporary French historian, Emmanuel Leroy Ladurie, has observed, and I quote, "History is the synthesis of all social sciences turned towards the past," unquote. Herein lies the majesty of one of the noblest of disciplines. I congratulate once again the Indian History Congress on its 75th anniversary and wish it decades of fruitful work in the future. I thank Professor Sapori for inviting me. Jai Hind.
Just I make the announcement for you. Now I request Professor Sudha Pai, Chairperson, Reception Committee of IHC JNU, for the vote of thanks.
It is my privilege to propose a vote of thanks on this very august occasion to all the various scholars and dignitaries present here. We are very grateful to the Honorable Vice President, Shri Hamid Ansari ji, for gracing the occasion and for inaugurating the conference, the History Congress, in spite of his busy schedule as well as the inclement weather, although now we seem to have better weather for the Congress, and I hope it will be so in the days ahead. We are very grateful to you, sir, for being with us today and sharing your thoughts about history and historians. Thank you for a very erudite and interesting inaugural address. You drew attention, sir, to the close relationship between the social sciences as a whole and history also, and how history should be studied in a broad manner. You have also drawn attention to the importance of history, both in the past as well as particularly in our contemporary period, which is fraught with differences, conflicts and controversies over what you called, particularly for India, the national question. You have also been, you have also drawn attention and drawn the attention of historians to the need to understand the complexity of India as a country, and that history should be studied within this framework and this lens. I am sure this gathering will take note of this and will, looking at the large number of papers that are being presented here today, many of them are on India and do deal with this extremely complex civilization. You have also drawn attention to two other aspects which are extremely important. One is maritime history. I must draw your attention, sir, perhaps you are aware of it, that the Center for Historical Studies has done work on Indian Ocean trade and generally on maritime history. But I am sure that in this Congress there will be many more papers presented on it, and it is a very interesting subject that I am sure they will keep in mind. The area of Afghanistan and Northwest India also is an area that you have indicated as being very important. We share this idea. I'm sure many people present here share this idea, and it is an area that should really be looked upon, both because of its contemporary importance and also because in the past also it has been a very important area where the Indian subcontinent has been concerned. We are very grateful to you, sir, for being with us and for sharing these thoughts with us. I am sure many of the aspects that you have underlined will be taken note of and will be the source of much discussion over the next 2-3 days. I would also like to thank the members of the Executive Committee of the Indian History Congress who are present here with us, for being with us and for their help and guidance in setting up this entire Congress. I would like to thank all the delegates who, in spite of the cold, have traveled from many parts of the country and are here with us. We were in fact overwhelmed by the number and the enthusiasm of those who wanted to attend the Congress. And so I would like to both welcome them and to thank them for taking the effort of coming here. I do hope they will be comfortable in this weather, and if there is something that JNU can do for you, please do not hesitate to meet the organizing committee, and we hope we will be able to look after you very well. I would particularly like to thank the team from the Rajya Sabha TV who are here with us today to film this very important occasion, and they have taken a lot of interest in the entire History Congress and its proceedings, and I would like to thank them for the same. The Academic Staff College has been the guiding force behind the entire arrangements that have been made for the History Congress, and I would like to thank both, of course, Professor Rakesh Bhattabyal and his entire team, as well as the organizing committee, for the efforts they have put in over the last few months. It has been a monumental task, but I am sure that the Congress will take off very well, and all the sessions will be there, and we will be able to enjoy a large number of papers and hold discussions over the next 3 days. Thank you very much for being with us, and I'm sure the Congress will be a great success. Thank you.
Now this is the time for national anthem.
कभी भी आते हैं